Welcome to Disrupting Japan, straight talk from Japan's most innovative founders and VCs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for joining me. I've got another quick in-between episode for you today. It's a great conversation about deep tech startups and the future of energy. I was part of a panel discussion organized by Scrum Ventures at the Sakura Deep Tech Shibuya conference. It was moderated by Michael Matsumura of Scrum Ventures, and I was joined on stage by Emi Naganuma, the founder and general partner at Apprecia Capital, and by Richard Youngman, the CEO of the Cleantech Group. We talk about the best way to raise venture funding as a deep tech startup, how enterprises and startups can better collaborate, the important gaps we see in the green tech ecosystem, and the somewhat controversial future of using ammonia and hydrogen as alternative fuels. So let's get right to the panel.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Maybe I'll just kick it off. Maybe we could start with Richard. Could you talk a bit about what you're seeing globally in terms of where the dollars are flowing now? Has that changed in the last 6 months, 1 year, from what you're seeing from your perspective?
It hasn't changed radically yet, but it may do. I think if you go into Q1, clearly there are deals in progress and so forth, some of which may have fallen apart, but some of which haven't. I don't think the community in the US, judging by our conference the year before, was expecting the Inflation Reduction Act to be sort of aggressively taken apart as it was. Meaning, if something was already, a deal was done, it was expected to continue. And so that's obviously created a lot of backtrack there. But geographically, I would say we're still to see that. I guess the second comment might be, in our 20 years, and why really we're excited to be in this part of the world more and more, is because we believe that innovation under this theme is coming from everywhere and should come from everywhere and needs to come from everywhere. This is not a Silicon Valley phenomenon. Silicon Valley has a role to play, but so does everywhere else. And so I think long term, we're expecting to see capital allocation change quite a lot.
Great. Then maybe staying on that sort of the macro theme, maybe I could go to Emi. Obviously, on a similar topic, but in terms of your limited partners, the discussions you're having with your investors, has there been a change in tone? Is there a difference in different sectors you guys are interested in, or the partners interested in? Could you maybe touch upon a bit about that?
I think from the expectations from the investors, the LPs into the fund, I see that they have shifted their interest into deep tech incredibly, especially university or research driven. So really deep tech and clean tech. In terms of geography as well, I think a lot of attention has been in the US, but now we do see more attention coming into Europe. We see US VCs also emerging into Europe. Before it was Series B or Series C that they came into, now early stage. I think from seed, we kind of see some US VCs coming in and trying to get into the deals. And I also see a shift of students coming in to study in Europe, but yes.
And in terms of your LPs, are they mostly Japanese, or are they a mix of global LP bases that you have?
We have Japanese corporates as LPs.
Thank you. Then maybe Tim, to your perspective, maybe also as JERA, you make 1/3 of the pound in Japan, but you obviously have global operations. You've got IPP businesses across Asia and also US as well. From your perspective, how is the changing sort of landscape impacting the way how JERA Ventures makes investments right now as well?
So energy is a global market. And I think that, to your point, you have to be globally minded. And I think when the IRA passed in the US a few years ago, there was this tremendous movement of innovative companies from Europe to the US. We're starting to see that trend reverse, and a lot of them are going back to Europe. But even within the US, I think, for example, my own companies had been enterprise software. And you can go to San Francisco and understand 80-90% of what's going on in the world of enterprise software. You can have your finger on the pulse, never leaving that area. Climate tech energy is not like that. There's a lot more going on globally. Even in the US, I think Boston is more innovative than San Francisco. But there's a lot going on in Europe and a lot going on in Australia. There's a lot of promising startups in Japan as well. So these things shift. If innovation in the US slows down, there's a lot of other places that'll pick up the slack, and it seems like they're already doing so.
Great, thank you. Then maybe just diving a little bit deeper into some specific technologies or themes maybe as well. I think Richard gave a good overview of the sort of, maybe the booms and busts is the wrong way to put it, but like, some hot sectors and less hot sectors. Maybe I'll start with Emi again then. What are the sort of areas that you see as very attractive right now? Like, where do you think you'll get good returns looking forward? Like, what excites you right now?
In terms of return and, of course, impact, we look at it into two kind of segments. First is where there's a high environmental impact right now that exists. So the large sectors, and usually these aren't so many. It's construction, agriculture, energy, concrete, etc. And then we look at the other one that is where there aren't so much of an environmental footprint yet, but that industry will grow. And we think that's really, really interesting. And Richard has already highlighted, but we think the AI infrastructure space is going to grow. So we're looking highly into that. It is becoming a competitive space. And also we look into space tech because that is really interesting as well. And it can provide solutions in climate tech that we haven't seen before and that could provide solutions that we couldn't even think of.
Yeah, I like the impact perspective is really important. And personally, I always thought that the industrial decarbonization never attracted enough capital, like given the emission level. So that's always a sector that I've always liked. Then maybe Tim, to your side, I think JERA's had a big focus on looking at hydrogen and sort of ammonia. And I know there's been talks about using ammonia in sort of coal-fired power plants, like co-firing, and then looking at sort of gas turbines using hydrogen as well. And obviously, as Richard highlighted earlier, hydrogen's kind of lost a bit of steam lately in terms of the investment cases right now. Is it still a viable sector that we should be looking at? Does it still have what's your perspective there?
Well, I think it depends on your time horizon and your investment objectives. So as a VC with a 7-year fund, I think it's really hard to invest in hydrogen. As an energy utility, or as a nation who needs to have a secure power grid, it is essential to continue investing in alternative fuels. Because in the long term, even if we get a very green grid, we shut down all the coal, we shut down all the gas plants, we get to carbon zero, eventually, the Germans have a wonderful word called Dunkelflaut. And it means when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. And right now, we've got batteries that'll do 8-hour storage, no problem, maybe 12, 24. There's some promising things that'll go to, 100 hours plus. But at some point, there's going to be a few weeks or a month where you've got the Dunkelflauten and you need to burn something. And that something could be fossil fuels, or it could be ammonia or hydrogen that is made with excess energy when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. So JERA's plant at Hekinan was the globally first successful test of a blended ammonia and coal firing. And it was 20% ammonia, 80% coal. And it was hugely successful. The engineers are saying we go to much higher ratios. So in terms of a startup investment, from a VC perspective, it's very hard to justify an investment like that. You're not going to see returns in 5 years or 10 years. But as a utility who's making 40-year investments and 80-year time horizon planning, it's essential. And so that's why alternative fuels, be it hydrogen or ammonia, is really important. In the midterm, I think storage is extremely exciting. In all forms, whether that's lithium-ion batteries or zinc oxide batteries or these iron rust batteries, or when I see EVs, basically it just looks like storage on wheels to me. So I think that's like, in terms of my investor brain, that's what I'm most excited about right now.
Nice. Okay. I'd like to add geothermal and maybe nuclear to that, but I'll
No, absolutely agree.
Like,
absolutely
okay.
agree.
Okay.
I mean, JERA doesn't do nuclear, so JERA doesn't have an official opinion on it, but I think it's pretty clear from all available analysis that there's no practical path to net zero without a lot of nuclear on the grid.
Yeah. Thank you. Then Richard, maybe to you. Obviously, Cleantech Group, you guys research and you look at so many different companies across the world. What are the sort of most under the radar sort of technologies and sort of sectors that interests you or excites you right now? Like, what are the things that we should be thinking about that might pop up in, like, let's say 5 years from now or something?
I mean, I'm not sure everything's really under the radar, but maybe things are very low level. People are still trying to figure it out. So I guess my mind's going to an area that's not really a technology, but it's a theme. Sadly, it's a theme that essentially, we're going to overshoot 1.5, we're going to overshoot 2. We're in the era of adaptation, and adaptation should never be separated from mitigation, because mitigation is adaptation. We're trying to adapt to a warming climate. But I guess where I'm going is I think that is a reality, and we're starting to see more companies who have some kind of solution that is in essence about a heating world. They're not planning for status quo. They're thinking what could happen in the 2-degree world, and therefore how do I insulate whatever it may be? It could be the grid, it could be factories, it could be workers. I mean, there's a major problem coming. It can be about wildfire early warning systems. It can be all kinds of things. But I would put that as a theme that we started looking at 5 years ago. No one took any interest at all. We tried again 2-3 years ago. It had changed. And this year, we're really feeling more and more people are leaning into this. Some people are not quite sure what to do with it, but I think, this is something that I think will just be common language in 3 to 5 years, is the idea that we have to develop technologies that can basically operate in a pretty hot and volatile world, shall we call it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I've heard more of as well from other people. And I think there's even things like SRM, like solar radiation management. I think it's very controversial. I also feel like that's something down the line, and there has been some startups doing that, but I think we might be seeing more stuff like that.
I'm glad you went there. I didn't, but geoengineering, as people call it, people are doing things. And, I'm afraid that's sort of a reflection of where we are.
Yeah. Okay, then maybe coming back to, we have obviously the Deep Tech Accelerator and we have startups here as well. And it'll be good to talk a bit about the sort of corporate startup sort of synergy, or sort of how they could work together as well. So maybe we could go to Tim, just because obviously you come from the CVC side, and we talked a bit about what Jera can do already, but maybe you could talk a bit about what sort of value proposition does Jera offer to some of the startups that you invest in, or that you have partnerships with.
So one of our investment criteria is that for a deep tech startup, we want to invest in companies we can bring to a pilot in the next year, 18 months. If it's a digital startup, it's something we can either start co-selling with or be a first off-taker in Japan within the same time frame, a year to 18 months. So the engagement model looks different for every startup. So for the startups that are focused on just general efficiency, improving the operations, it's relatively simple. Jira can be the first lighthouse account. We provide warm introduction to other companies in the energy industry. And if you've ever tried to sell into the Japanese energy industry, the first question you're always going to get is, well, who else is using you? And if it's it's this German utility, it's like, oh, that's nice, but come back to us when you have a Japanese customer. And some of the startups here might have already been hearing this. So having that first lighthouse account is really valuable. For the deep tech startups, some of the things that's most exciting, you mentioned like geothermal. So we have a lot of old coal plants in these power stations in various stages of decommissioning that are ideal for experimentation. They've got the good connections. It's permitted for a coal site, so you can put pretty much anything there. And it's an ideal test bed for collaboration, either with a brand new type of technology or for efficiencies where if the site's only operating 1 week a year, it's ideal to run experiments to get that data. There's plenty of time to prepare before and after. So although every engagement model looks different, there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration.
Nice. Yeah, I think having those assets is very valuable. So then maybe Richard, to going back to you again, I know that in a lot of your reports and stuff, you have a lot of case studies of how startups and corporates work together. Maybe from your perspective then, like what are the most sort of successful corporate and sort of startup collaborations that you've seen in climate tech?
I guess two things. One, I think this is one of the most important areas that we need to solve. So I personally don't believe technology availability is going to be the sort of problem. I think it's the sort of system adjusting to the speed with which we need to move. And no offense to clients and non-clients and corporates in the room, but this is not natural territory for big industrial companies. They haven't ever had to move. In fact, no one's ever had to move at this pace. But if we're really going to take that collaboration seriously, develop pilots and scale at the pace required, I think, there's so much ground for innovation purely in that relationship. So I would say we are in the phase where people are experimenting. I mean, Tim just referenced, his own experience from the energy industry, but it's happening in every industry. And the trouble is there isn't a playbook. And then there isn't even really the idea of a playbook for anyone, because it's different depending on, what kind of company you are and your culture and what you can get away with and how much support you've got from the board, et cetera, et cetera. But I do, you're hitting on an area that I think is hugely important. I'm not familiar with it. Maybe somebody is here, but the biotech pharma world did work out this in the end, but it did take them a long time. I mean, I don't think it was smooth riding in the early days, but I think they know how to live with each other now, and we're going to have to get there quite fast. In terms of collaborations, I mean, clearly there are numerous successful ones, but they're successful to the extent of where they've got to. Meaning where you really want to be is look back and think, wow, that was the instigator for the 5 to 10 year journey that took this company or technology from relatively small scale to a globally used and common technology. So I think long way to say, ton of things to do there. Long way to go. People have been experimenting, and again, if anybody senior at corporates, my message is always, please don't start one of these programs if you're going to turn it off in 3 to 5 years, because it's just what you don't even bother starting. It's the most critical thing, because the learnings that people have along the way will help them sort of work out how it should work. Tim looks like he wants to add something.
If it's okay, if I can add a bit of color to that. So, so a big part of my job is going and talking to engineers. And the cultural gap is not appreciated as much as it should be on either side. Move fast and break things is not a philosophy you want to have when you're talking about the power grid or about healthcare or a lot of these industries. So a lot of them are conservative for a very, very good reason. And so a very important part that can lead to success is being able to create, for lack of a better term, sort of a safe space within the organization for that experimentation. The engineers who are running these power stations globally, not just in Japan, these are people who pride themselves on having downtime measured in, hours per decade. To say they are risk averse is really understating it. Their whole mission in life is keeping things running, being predictable, literally keeping the lights on. And they don't want to change anything, right? Because any change is a risk. So it's very important for any CVC in a conservative industry to set up that safe grounds for collaboration and to educate the startups on what to expect, and likewise to educate their own engineering and internal teams on what to expect. So it's not so much a problem of one side or the other has to change their behavior, but we need to develop a better common language and understanding. Because both sides, startups and enterprises, are usually acting with the right motivations and very practically from their own point of view.
Thank you. Maybe going to you, Emi, then, and you can take this either way you want to, but maybe bring it back to Japan a little bit as well. And you could talk a bit about what you see in terms of startup scene, or it could even be the ecosystem in terms of like bringing foreign startups to Japan as well. What's the sort of perspective and what sort of advice do you have to startups as well? Like, what are you seeing in that sense?
Maybe then I'll combine it with the conversation we had now as well. I would say, especially for this deep tech ecosystem, it's the role of corporates, I think, is really, really important, because especially for deep tech, it's really difficult. The biggest challenge for them is to find that first pilot project partner or that strategic off-taker. And so I think that if corporates can step in there from an early stage, that would be really, really beneficial for the ecosystem. And it's not just helpful for the startups, it's also beneficial for the corporates, because usually the startups that have really high potential and great technology, they're not going to sign exclusivity with the corporates. So if that company can take that will be that first door opener for that startup. They will be hugely appreciative. You can do that pilot project, do the feedback loop, and then co-design or have solutions that fit into your business as well. So I think it's incredibly beneficial for that corporate if the corporates can, if they find the technology that they think, okay, this will fit into our business. I think it's great if they can take that risk into opening that first door. Compared to the startup, they're going to be fully committed with that limited resource compared to the company that has much more budget. I think the corporates I do encourage corporates to just go out there. And you mentioned the startups. I encourage startups to engage with corporates early on, probably from TRL 4, the technology readiness level from 4, because at that time you probably have enough technical foundation to have serious conversations with the corporates, get good feedbacks, loop it into your design before, continuing with that research. And you'll be able to create that pipeline of clients, which is so really, really critical. And these days, investors, they expect clear commercialization paths early on from pre-seed. So going out there, talking to industries, understanding how your technology really have the potential, where's the urgent areas, I think that's really, really important from both sides.
Yeah, love that point about the engaging the corporates and early on and that sort of stuff. Maybe just coming back to Japan again a little bit, and then talking a bit about sort of the climate tech trajectory and sort of challenges and opportunities in Japan. Maybe I'll speak to Tim this time. What are the sort of biggest sort of needs in terms of like climate technologies for the Japanese market? You think what are the sort of pressing sort of areas, gaps that exist that corporates are probably looking for in your opinion?
Well, I like I said before, I think climate tech, energy, it's a global business. So it's a global industry. So the challenges that are faced in Japan, the gaps here are pretty much the same as the gaps everywhere in terms of the actual technologies. In terms of startup innovation in Japan, I think the biggest challenge, and part of this is the industry's fault, is there's not enough awareness among startup community and among university students of what these problems are. And I think part of that is if you look in Europe or in the US, there is a steady stream of people who go back and forth from the industry to startups so that you get this great cross-pollination. And in Japan, that hasn't really happened yet. When I'm mentoring and when I'm talking, particularly at universities, a lot of the startup ideas are worthwhile, but they tend to miss the mark because they don't have that deep understanding of the industry. And I suspect it's probably true not just in energy and climate. So it's not so much a lack of technology. The fundamental research that's being done in Japanese laboratories and Japanese universities is top notch. The problem is the lack of commercialization. So we mentioned hydrogen before. So Japan made big bets on hydrogen in the early 2000s. At the time it was a really good bet. Nobody knew battery prices were going to fall by 95% and that the energy density was going to increase by like 6 times or whatever it was. So at the time, it was a good bet. So Japan should be the leader in hydrogen. All the top electrolyzer companies, storage companies, transport companies should be coming out of Japan, but they're not. The European and American companies that are doing this are leveraging Japanese research, but Japan never commercialized it. So it's not a lack of technology. It's a lack of a process where those innovations are funneled into meaningful solutions that address problems in the industry. And I think that is a big problem in Japan right now.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's quite a common thing I've heard across from different people. So yeah, maybe Richard, is there anything on this topic that, from your perspective, looking at the startup scene across APAC as well, but across the world, but like from a Japan perspective as well, is there anything you'd like to add to this topic as well?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm definitely in the learning category for sure when it comes to Japan. I mean, our interest is to help global flow towards Japan and Japan find global solutions. So what's going on the ground, I'm certainly the weakest of the panelists on that. I guess, just one observation. I mean, I was here in November. and I hadn't been here for 10 years, it was very noticeable to me how much had changed in that regard. So it's great to see startup activity happening. Inevitably, if it's only relatively young, it's got a long way to go. I mean, that's why the US is the leader in venture capital, because it's just got the in-depth, embedded, multi-generational ecosystem. There isn't really a shortcut there.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the panel session as well. So maybe just to wrap it up, maybe to each one of you, maybe you could make a bit of a prediction or sort of like, what you see going forward. Like, what are the sort of big things that could have a big impact in terms of climate? It could be technology, it could be sort of policy trend changes, it could be sort of geopolitics. What are the things that keep you up at night that you think about? Maybe Emi, I'll start with you then.
I would say, as I touched upon earlier, the solutions that we haven't thought of in the AI infrastructure adjacent areas and in terms of space tech. But this is industrial driven, but the technologies can range from advanced materials to manufacturing, robotics, automation, and energy efficiency. So actually it's quite broad, even though it's in this sector. I think these are the actually it's getting really competitive, so better to get in early. But these are kind of the areas that I am keen on researching more and trying to find the next gem.
I think the most exciting thing that's happening right now in energy innovation was it was actually touched on a slide that Richard showed, that we've moved from a point where we need to deploy renewables to save the planet to where we're deploying renewables because it's the cheapest, most cost-effective thing to do. And I think that transition, we're already in the process of making it. It's going to be critical. Saving the planet will be a side effect, but it will still happen. I think that we're also going to see a transition from, particularly with the current administration, there's going to be a transition from a focus on renewable energy for green energy's sake to one of energy security, which is also going to push Japan, Europe towards a lot of green energy deployment. It'll probably push the US and India into more fossil fuels, but globally it will accelerate the trend of green energy deployment. So I think the thing I'm most excited about at a macro level is that the economics, rather than altruism, is in the driver's seat pushing green energy.
Well, here to that. I mean, I think that was always the goal, right? Certain technologies have got there and many more need to. I was going to give you two very different thoughts, just in the interest of being provocative. One, so keeping up at night, I guess I'm worried about the insurance industry from the point of view that, connected to what I'm really talking about from a heating climate point of view, of are we in danger of getting to a point where things become uninsurable, or either because it's so costly to do so. In some ways, the early signs of that have started. States in the US have had to step in and provide insurance schemes for places that are liable to wildfires or other places, flooding, etc. So think about that in terms of energy assets and manufacturing assets and commercial assets. Where are we going to put these things? Because if we put them in the places we've been putting them for the last 50 years, they may struggle. So that's one concern. I guess the other thing, I'm always looking for what's really going to move the needle. Again, I'm not saying it's going to, but I've been watching legal cases of late, which I think are worth watching. They're often losing, but they're setting precedent. So the recent one, I think, was a Peruvian farmer against RWE. And it was essentially the argument that RWE, by being a thermal energy generator, had, I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially the argument of my livelihood as a Peruvian farmer has been affected by the activity of RWE. The case was lost, but the principle was not. It was almost said that it was not proven that there was a direct link, but that actually conceptually that could be. So I guess in the world where we need everybody moving the needle for change, in a world where clearly politically, globally, we're not going to get there. We need other avenues. So I'm watching legal cases because that's going to frighten the hell out of industries if that starts to become a thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Those are two scary things to think about as we finish off the panel. But thank you very much. But I think that the positive bit, I think, really is that the cost of renewables has really dropped, where it's like it's often below grid parity in many places now as well. So, but I mean, obviously, you have to think about firm power. So, like, firming that up does increase the cost of power, maybe. But even with that, I think falling battery cost, it does make it very economic. So I think that's probably on a positive note we can finish. So, thank you very much to our panelists.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope you find climate tech and energy innovation as fascinating and as exciting as I do. And hey, if you enjoy Disrupting Japan, please rate and review on your podcast platform of choice, or, better yet, just tell someone you know about the show. It means a lot. But most of all, thanks for listening. And thank you for letting people interested in Japanese startups and VCs know about the show. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for listening to Disrupting Japan.